Thank you, Michael. Some years ago, I was reading a book, the author of whom I have long admired. Now, this book was obviously a satire, and a very funny and effective satire at that, but as I was reading it, I couldn't help but think about the question posed in the title of the book, and I couldn't come up with an answer as to why not Al Franken. So I continued to think about that, and apparently the good people of the state of Minnesota couldn't come up with a good answer to that either. So due to their wisdom and insight and intelligence, thanks to the good people of Minnesota, I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing Senator Al Franken.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here with the Future Music Coalition, and it's great to be here with Mike Mills of REM. I love how the Future of Music Coalition gives exposure to new artists like Mike. I've had my eye on these guys, REM, and you watch out. They're going to take off. They're out of this whole Athens, Georgia scene. Look out for some young kids called the B-52s. Maybe, Michael, you should have them here next year at the Future of Music Coalition. And thanks for holding this in such a futuristic-looking room. And thank you, Mike, for referencing Why Not Me, my least successful book. Now, as you probably all know, I got to the Senate a little late, but I didn't get here too late because we're debating issues of major consequence right now: healthcare, the economy, the course of the war in Afghanistan. And one of the issues you don't hear about as much, but one that will tremendously impact our lives, our economy, and yes, the future of music, is net neutrality. Several years ago, and I can't remember exactly when, I think it was the mid to late 90s, I went and gave a speech to the folks at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and I remember asking what cool things that they're working on, and later, a guy came up to me and took me aside and said that he was working on an unmanned aerial vehicle the size of an insect. And I was really excited about that. Evidently, that hasn't happened. They didn't make the bug-sized unmanned aerial vehicle work. But they did create the ARPANET 40 years ago. And the ARPANET grew into the internet, which is almost as cool as a bug-sized unmanned aerial vehicle with a camera and a Hellfire missile on it. And today the internet is the town square. Thomas Jefferson famously said that given a choice between government without newspapers and newspapers without government, he would, quote, not hesitate to prefer the latter. If he were here today, I think he'd see the internet in much the same light. Now, fortunately, we don't have to make that choice. Because the internet is a platform for speech, debate, and creativity, and it is neutral, government has to play a role in making sure that it stays that way. And let me add that this is a fundamental political philosophy that I bring as a senator to many of our national challenges. Government's job is to make sure that everybody gets a chance to start at the starting line, at the same starting line. Not that we finish the same at the finishing line, but that at least everyone starts at the same starting line. And that's how the internet developed. The FCC treated the web as a common carrier similar to the phone, meaning that anyone had the right to access it however they wanted, so long as they weren't breaking the law. But as high-speed internet became available, the cable and telecom industries convinced the FCC to change the rules to give corporate internet service providers, ISPs, the power to, quote, to use, quote, network management. That's code for finding ways to squeeze more cash out of their networks. And as a result, the freedom and openness of the internet has become seriously challenged. Right now, a blog loads just as quickly as a corporate web page. An email from your mother comes through just as smoothly as a bill from your large bank. An independent bookstore can process your order as quickly as Barnes & Noble. A garage band can stream its songs just as easily as a multi-platinum super band like REM. Don't like the internet so much now, do you, Mike? I think if I had actually said those words correctly, it would have helped the joke. But recently, business executives from top ISPs have declared their interests in offering, quote, prioritized internet service to companies who can pay for it. In other words, a company like Microsoft or Amazon could pay for its content to be delivered over a high-speed network, relegating a blogger or a mom-and-pop store to the slow lane. That would transform the internet from a free, open, and competitive playing field into a pay-for-play arena in which citizen bloggers, nonprofits, and small businesses are simply outgunned by major media conglomerates. That would transform the World Wide Web into a system of separate and unequal networks. And it raises two major issues as I see it. First, it raises the issue of censorship. Once service providers are in the business of deciding what content moves at what speed, they come very close to deciding what kind of content moves at all. Second, this is about entrepreneurialism and innovation. Great innovations can only take place on an even playing field where the little guys can go head-to-head with the big guys. If we change the rules of the game to benefit the big guys, innovation will suffer. So the issue here isn't only what might be blocked from us, but the issue is also what might never be developed in the first place. Okay, so let me talk about each of these. First, censorship. Take a look at Iran. In Iran, every internet provider uses filters to control the websites and emails that the users can access. They use a technology called deep packet inspection to inspect every email, Facebook post, and tweet that anyone sends, and in real time. They can block content in real time that they deem objectionable. That's cool, isn't it? Oh, no, it isn't. It's not cool. It's awful. Now, you might say, well, that's a terrible situation. But it's just, you know, it's happening to Iran, and this isn't Iran. Well, we're not Iran, but that isn't stopping several companies from taking the same or similar technology out for kind of a test ride. You may remember that in 2007, Verizon refused to allow the pro-choice group NARAL to send text messages to supporters, even though they had signed up to receive them. Verizon's explanation was that they had the right to block, quote, controversial or unsavory messages. Like, for example, that a woman should have control of her reproductive system. Second example, Comcast has used deep packet inspection to block lawful peer-to-peer applications. And you may remember that during a live webcast of a 2007 Pearl Jam concert, AT&T killed the audio for a few beats. It turns out the missing lyrics were criticisms of President Bush. Now, as big of fans as you and I may be of President Bush, This still wasn't the right thing for AT&T to do, and I was personally embarrassed. As I know Mike was. The stifling of openness on the internet isn't always about censorship. In the future, it'll simply be a product, it could be, a product of business at work, of ISPs turning a bigger profit. The chief technology officer for Bell South recently said, "I can buy a coach standby ticket or a first-class ticket. I can get 2-day air or 6-day ground." And he asserted the internet should be the same way. The CEO of Verizon made the same point when he said, "We need to make sure that there is the right economic model. We need to pay for the pipe." And one provider proposed a system where consumers could pay a cheap monthly rate for light internet use, a higher fee for heavier use, but with an exception for people who access only the content created by that provider. That's a business motive, but it has the effect of limiting speech. And as far as I'm concerned, free speech limited or free speech delayed are the same as free speech denied. Because the truth is that the internet is the town hall of the 21st century. In the 1997 decision, Reno versus ACLU, Justice Stevens wrote, "Through the use of chat rooms, any person with a phone line can become a town crier with a voice that resonates farther than it could from any soapbox. Through the use of web pages, mail exploders, and news groups, the same individual can become a pamphleteer." Now, I know you know that, but this is from a pretty old Supreme Court justice who's pretty smart. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and on my 4th day in the Senate, my first hearing on a committee, we were dealing with the nomination of Judge Sonia Sotomayor, now Justice Sotomayor, and I asked her specifically about what she thought, whether she thought that the American public had a compelling First Amendment interest in censoring the internet, or ensuring, that the internet stays open and accessible, and I'll paraphrase her answer. It was yes. As noisy and messy as it may be, the internet is a democracy, and because of that, it is a critical part of our democracy. But in the absence of strong legislation prohibiting ISPs from regulating content, that may not always be the case. Let me add that among the people who would be hurt the most are rural users who, like many in my home state of Minnesota, often have access to one single ISP. If that rural ISP decides to favor or cut special deals with big companies or the companies that the ISP owns, rural users will be subjected only to the viewpoints that the ISP favors. ISP profit margins should never come at the cost of free speech and open internet, because while they may benefit, we all lose. And it's not just the material that could be slowed or censored, it's innovation itself. In America, we think that an individual with a big idea is just as worthy as competing as a company with a big market share. But the loss of a neutral internet would mean that the market be no longer competitive. It would no longer be a meritocracy. Consider the case of YouTube. YouTube was founded in 2005 above a pizzeria in San Mateo, California. At the same time, the most popular video application was something called Google Video, an app that most people came to realize was slow and clunky. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Google. You can search anything. Put in Michael Mills, and what do you get? You get the Wikipedia entry for Mike Mills. And, but I digress. Anyway, because it was so well designed, YouTube quickly gained a user base and gradually overcame Google Video. And as we know, Google actually bought YouTube and retired Google Video. Now, this all happened because YouTube and Google Video competed on the same playing field, accessed the same internet, and in a meritocratic system, consumers saw that YouTube was better. But in a world where Google could pay an ISP for premium access, Google Video would have secured priority status, leaving YouTube to a second-tier track, and YouTube would have loaded too slowly to win viewers, and we'd be stuck with Google Video. Again, what's at stake here isn't just what could be taken away, it's what could never be created in the first place. The internet has been a tremendous platform for innovation and entrepreneurship. Guaranteeing its continued success isn't just about giving consumers better apps, it's about the economic future of our country. Now, I know many of you in the music and entertainment industry are concerned about where net neutrality fits in with your efforts against piracy. Having spent much of my life as a writer and entertainer, I own copyrights too, and I share your concerns. But net neutrality is and must be explicitly a matter of protecting lawful content, applications, and usage. Whether we do it through statute or regulation, ISPs must and will retain the right to combat unlawful usage of the internet. Now, how we do that technologically is an enormous question. You may remember when Senator Ted Stevens insightfully pointed out that the internet, quote, is not something you just dump something on, it's not a truck, it's a series of tubes. In making that statement, I think Senator Stevens illustrated why some members of Congress might not be the right people to answer that technological question. And that's why it's good news that the FCC is now taking the lead in this battle. Recently, Chairman Julius Genachowski, whom you'll hear from later today, announced that the Commission will be issuing pro-net neutrality regulations. The Commission rules will emphasize non-discrimination, barring ISPs from discriminating for or against particular internet content or applications, and transparency, requiring ISPs to be open about their network management practices. And he's right. An ISP should not be able to prioritize certain traffic over other traffic. A company cannot pay to have a fast track over the internet. And we need to be serious about transparency. ISPs should have to disclose to consumers any practices that may affect communications between a user and a content application or service provider. This ensures that when ISPs do take actions that slow down one content provider and speed up another, users will find out. But also we need to acknowledge that sometimes it's citizens and not the government that are in the best position to protect the internet. We need to empower internet users to file complaints directly to the FCC and allow them to recover damages in certain instances. Finally, and I think the FCC will agree with me on this one, we need to give the experts at the FCC the flexibility they need to solve this complicated set of problems. So rest assured that even though Senator Stevens is no longer here to lend us his tube expertise, I will be standing ready to work with knowledgeable leaders in Congress, Senator Dorgan, Senator Snow, Congressman Markey, Congresswoman Eshoo, to make sure we get it right. For the first time, it looks like we might actually do this. The FCC is on board, and so are critical leaders in Congress. In addition, President Obama has consistently voiced support for net neutrality. Recently, he put net neutrality at the top of his national innovation agenda. So, although previous efforts to pass net neutrality have failed, we now have both a president and an FCC chairman who strongly support the cause. This is not to say the debate is over and won. Some of my colleagues have already introduced legislation to block net neutrality efforts, And just last week, a Washington Post editorial declared that, quote, federal regulators should not be telling internet service providers how to run their business. And net neutrality will, quote, micromanage what has been a vibrant and well-functioning marketplace. Ignore for a moment the irony that a leading newspaper would come out against a bill whose purpose includes protection of free speech. Let me say that net neutrality is not a matter of needless government intervention. It is a necessary response to verifiable instances of ISPs discriminating against users based on applications they use, and ISPs voicing their support for a separate and unequal internet. It is a 21st century reiteration of one of our most important constitutional rights, the right to free speech. And it doesn't interfere with the free market, it protects the free market. A century ago, President Teddy Roosevelt wrote, above all else, we must strive to keep the highways of commerce open to all on equal terms. He may have been writing in a different time and addressing different technology, but his purpose is just as relevant today. Thank you. Okay, let's do it in comfy chairs.
Good by me. All right, so I'm curious as to go back just a little ways to the beginning of your political career. At what point did you decide that you were going to run? Was there an incident that made it happen? Were you angry at someone in the government? Were you frustrated with someone's actions or lack of actions? Was there a tipping point, to use one of the catchphrases of the day?
Yeah, when people ask me about, a lot of people consider my career arc very unusual and counterintuitive, and it's made perfect sense to me. I've always written political satire. I've always wrote about politics, always been interested in politics. I've been interested in politics because my parents were. And I grew up during the civil rights struggle, and my dad was a Republican until 1964. And we would sit in front of the TV and we'd watch demonstrators in the South have dogs sicked on them and fire hoses, and he'd go, that's wrong, that's wrong. No Jew can be for that. And so, because Barry Goldwater was against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, my dad became a Democrat and stayed a Democrat. This has always been real important to me. And people who write comedy very often are, have a serious side to them. And I just, on Saturday Night Live, the role of the show was not to have a political point of view. It wasn't. And I wrote with a guy named Jim Downey a lot of the political stuff. And he's pretty conservative, and we kept each other honest, and I thought we did great stuff together, and with other people on the show as well. But then I left, and I got to start, when I did that, I started writing my own political stuff, so I wrote Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot and other observations. And I started writing books about this stuff, and while the books were satirical, they were serious by definition. And then I did a radio show, and so it actually seemed to be kind of a natural thing for me to consider this. And then Paul Wellstone died in a plane crash in 2002, and my kids Franny and I became empty nesters, and we could move back to Minnesota, and we did. And I was doing USO tours at the time, and going to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I remember thinking about running, and I remember the day I made the decision to do it. I was in Iraq, Because I was saying, well, I'm going to have to take 2 years out of my life. And what is this? I'm not going to be able to make any income, and I'm going to be, what am I going to put my family through? And I saw these men and women there and what their families are going through. And many of them were on their fourth or fifth tour. And I said, well, how can I not do this? So I'm really serious about my job. And I'm really serious about doing the work of the people of Minnesota and of the people of this country. And this is a very important issue. That's why I came here today.
Glad you did. So now that you're in this most collegial society, how are you finding it? Is it, to this point, is it proving more difficult than you imagined? Are you finding more partisanship than you expected or less? Is hope for going forward something that you're finding to be considerable?
It sort of depends. Depends on the issue. There are issues where there is complete bipartisanship. Some issues are just regional. Some issues are just, you know, Paul Wellstone said that the purpose of politics is not to win elections. It's not for power. It's to improve people's lives. So my first bill, you know, I had a little bit of time between the election and when I got here. So I worked on a bill that was inspired by a guy I met, a veteran who was wounded and has PTSD, who has a service dog. And I saw how much his life was improved by this. So my first bill was to create a pilot program that would provide wounded veterans with service dogs who can do amazing things. And we have so many guys coming back with PTSD and who are depressed, and these dogs do wonderful things. And so I reached out first to Johnny Isaacson of Georgia, a Republican, pretty conservative Republican, and asked him to be the lead co-sponsor because he's on Veterans Affairs. I didn't get on that committee, so I asked him to co-sponsor, and he did. And I got Lindsey Graham and John Ensign, who's a veterinarian, and the bill passed. And I think it's going to go through the conference, and we'll get it funded. And I met with the VA, and I'm going to be very active in that. So on that issue, that was not partisan at all. Now we have the very important issue, much bigger issue of health care in general, and I'm finding that to be more partisan than I would have liked, obviously. And I think Chairman Baucus held out hope for bipartisanship, and I think he's kind of been disappointed by that. And we have to get health care done. We have to provide affordable, quality health care for every American, just like every other industrial Western country does, and they do it at less cost than we do it, and they get better outcomes. And I'm optimistic about doing it. I'm just not optimistic about it being bipartisan. And one of the surprises that I've seen is the lack of informed debate.
Yes, there are no real alternatives being offered from the other side. It's merely an attempt to stop anything being done.
Well, that's really the disappointing part about, again, going back to Paul's thing about it's not about winning elections, not about power, it's about improving people's lives. There's nothing that you can do to improve people's lives better than reforming the healthcare system. And yet, I've seen Republicans, I've seen a colleague of mine saying that he hopes this fails, so it'll be Obama's Waterloo. Well, that's about politics. And it's not about, when I went around Minnesota campaigning, when I talk to people now, what they care about is they worry that they'll get something, that they'll get sick, or their kid will get sick, or their spouse will get sick, and they will lose their job and won't be able, because they'll have a pre-existing condition, their family will never be able to get health care. Well, we got to fix that. How can you not change that? They're worried. I've talked to people who've gone bankrupt because they got sick or were in an accident. They don't do that in other countries. Only we do it. More than half the people in this country who go bankrupt because of a health care crisis, and 80% of those who go bankrupt had health insurance. We've got to change that. And we've got to change the way we deliver health care. We do it pretty good in Minnesota. In Minnesota, for every dollar that we put into health insurance, every dollar in a premium, 91 cents comes back in health care. In other states, it's like 70 to 80 cents. I've just put in an amendment to require insurance companies to spend 90% of the premiums on health care. And we can pay for this whole thing. But we don't incentivize preventive care. We don't incentivize treating chronic diseases. We incentivize sickness. Mm-hmm. We don't do health care in this country. We do sick care. And that's the big change that we need to do. We need to do patient-centered health care, not profit-centered health care. We can do it. It'll provide better care for people. It'll be accessible to people. And by the way, as an economic engine, we need to do this because the way we're going right now is completely unsustainable. And the biggest job creator in this country will be healthcare reform. Because small businesses, if you're a small business now and you have 20 employees and one of them gets sick, really gets cancer, the next year your premiums are going to go way up. Well, under this health care plan, under reform, you can go to to the exchange and join a much bigger plan that has a million people in it. So your risk group, instead of being 20 people, is 1 million people. And what bothers me is I'm not hearing anything coming from the other side that's other than some talking points that aren't backed up by any real stuff.
Simply no. All right, excellent. I believe that we are opening it up to questions from the audience.
Senator Hal Ponder with the American Federation of Musicians. Welcome to the Senate, and we're very glad you're there and that you're sitting on the Judiciary Committee. We support net neutrality. I'm very glad to hear your remarks and your strong support for it. It's good for young musicians. We also hope that whatever's done on net neutrality will protect copyright product that musicians produce, because that's important. I also wanted to raise an issue that's before your committee, the Performance Rights Act, right, which you spoke very favorably about at the hearing last July, and we certainly would appreciate your strong support for that bill, S379.
Yes, this is basically a bill that would, for some reason, terrestrial radio doesn't pay performance rights for artists. They pay for the publishing rights. They pay the songwriter. But they don't pay the performers. How do you feel about that?
I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah. I'm in a unique position on the committee on this because I'm both someone who has, performed, and even in the audio realm, and also have been the host of a radio show on Radio Network that was going broke. So I have some sympathy with both sides. And I just want to make sure that very small stations aren't, in a time when the business model for terrestrial radio is as bad as it's ever been, that especially small stations that actually tend to play the newer music, and this is the Future of Music Coalition after all, that they aren't penalized. So I'd like to find a way to actually while I'm supportive of the bill, I think I want to find ways to make sure that small stations aren't have to pay just a very, very minimal part of this, so that Mike will won't get quite as much, but you'll be, that the larger stations will pay their...
A staggered scale.
Yeah. Is that okay with you?
I like it.
Yeah, you see? Like, I
We have
reached a compromise right here.
Time for just one more question back here.
Hi, my name is Alex Den. I'm an anthropologist here at GW. I'm also a lapsed songwriter. I wonder if you see any conflict at all between the policing of this thing that often gets called piracy and net neutrality.
Well, as I said, there are going to, I believe that there are technology issues there. And the question is how do you technically separate legal and illegal material, I think. Isn't that the issue? Yeah. And I'm sorry? Okay, well, this is either above my pay grade or below my pay grade, but I don't know how much technological geniuses get paid. So I think I actually referenced that in my speech, that there are technological issues and questions in how to resolve that. But I think it needs to be resolved. And I think the FCC chairman in his speech where he announced his pro-net neutrality position, he spoke to that as well. So I think that issue needs to be resolved by people who are expert in that technology and architecture. So, I don't want to make I don't want a tubes moment here. So I don't want to speak about. I don't want to speak about the architecture.
The good news, Senator, is we have like an 80-minute panel on this very issue this afternoon, so it's going to be great. So anyway, we'll fix it all now.
Please go to the 80-minute panel.
We are done.
We're done?
Senator Franken, Mike Mills, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.